Next, we are going to sculpt the head. Before that, let's cover several major bone points of the head. We've covered those in previous lessons. Now let's review the three most important bone points: the brow ridge, the cheekbone, and the jawbone. The head's mesh density is quite high at the moment. Let's smooth out the head mesh first. Let's find the references of the head. And quickly sculpt the basic structure of the head based on our previous analysis. The head is still in a rough state, not yet ready for detailing. However, due to the high mesh density, adjusting the big shape is challenging, especially when using smooth brush, which requires repeated strokes to achieve the desired effect. These issues make it inconvenient to adjust the big shape while sculpting. Let's give it a try, but if this goes on, we will consider sculpting the head separately. At this stage, similar to when we started sculpting the body, our goal is only to shape the basic forms of each structure without detailing. The ear is missing a structure of the accessory auricle. Let's sculpt this out, reminiscent of the dew claw on the foreleg. Isn't it similar? The back of the ear is somewhat flat, and in wolves, as in humans, the conchus forms a bulging contour on the back. The outermost part is quite thin. We'll go to an angle similar to the reference image, which makes it easier to observe and adjust the model. The adjustments for the ear's rough shape are sufficient for now. Let's continue adjusting the facial part. Find the position of the eyes and use draw brush to sculpt out the indentation that contains the eye. Then let's create a model for the eyeball. Press Shift+A to create a new UV sphere in the scene, which we'll use to model the eyeball. Hover the cursor over the eye position, then left-click to move the cursor to the eye position. Next, press Shift+S and choose Selection to Cursor to move the sphere directly to the eye position. Press S to scale it to the appropriate size. Then we enter Edit mode by pressing Tab. The sphere needs to be rotated 90 degrees. Press R and enter 90. Continue to scale to the appropriate size and move to the approximate position. The eyeball consists of two layers, the outer vitreous and the inner iris and pupil. The structure of the eye is an outer layer wrapping the inside. We need to enlarge the eye a bit more. We duplicate the sphere and first create the inner iris and pupil. Enter Edit mode, and we select the faces of the pupil and iris part. Then switch the transformation orientation to normal to adjust it conveniently. Next, we change the pivot point to median point and move the model with Move tool. Currently, the fall-off is turned on, and we need to decrease its range a little bit. Let's work on the mesh and create the edges of the pupil and iris. Here we select the outermost circle of edges of the iris, press Ctrl+B to create a bevel, thus forming the edge of the iris. The model of the pupil and iris is quickly completed. Display the vitreous body. It needs to wrap the inner model up, so we scale it a little bit bigger. It's different in that its front is somewhat protruding. Select the foremost face and move it forward. We need to make the contour on the front curved. Clearly, the current number of edges is insufficient. Press Ctrl+R to insert a loop of edges in the middle, then adjust its shape. Select this circle of edges and perform another bevel to create a distinct edge. Bevel the very front as well. Good. It's basically done. Quite simple, right? After adjusting, we merge the two models. Now we can move the eyeball to the correct position. We enter the top view and switch to wireframe display mode. Place the eyeball model in the appropriate position. Then we apply the eyeball model's location properties to default values. Press Ctrl+A and select Location. Then we find the modifier panel and add a mirror modifier here. The rotation and scale values also affect the mirror effect, so we apply the rotation and scale properties to default values as well. The purpose of adding eyeballs is to adjust the structure of the eye socket based on the shape of the eyeballs. When creating the structure of the eyes, we need to identify 2 points, the inner and outer eye corners, and determine their relative positions in the front and side views. First, let's adjust the shape of the eyes from the side view. Find the reference for the side view. We saw that the upper eyelid is more forward than the lower eyelid according to the side view references. Let's adjust its shape accordingly. We'll also refine the structures around the eyes. Currently, there are quite a few issues with the rough shape of the head that need to be adjusted, but the high mesh density makes it inconvenient. We need to separate the head for sculpting. Copy the body. Set the name of the original model to Body, representing the body model. Enter Edit mode and delete vertices outside the head. Note that we need to enter wireframe mode. After selecting the body parts mesh, we directly press X and choose vertices. The body part is deleted. Then, we select the entire mesh and press F to fill the blank. Thus, we can readjust the mesh density of the head with Remesh. Press R to observe and adjust to a suitable density. Then Remesh. Alright, with the mesh issue resolved, let's continue sculpting. First, check the position of the eyes against the reference. Let's refer to the front view reference and observe the space between the eyes and their relative position to the ears. We notice that the space between the eyes is somewhat wide, leading to unfocused eyes. Let's directly adjust the position of the eyes. First, use Grab Brush in Sculpt mode to adjust the mesh. Then select the eye model to adjust the eyeball's position in Edit mode. It's important to change the transformation orientation to Global mode. Fix the structure of the eye socket slightly. Next, we are going to observe and adjust the model against references from different angles. There's a depression in the middle of the forehead. Let's draw it, making the forehead part a bit fuller. Back to our main reference of head in the perspective view. Go to a similar angle. We need to refine the structure of the upper eyelid according to the reference. Around the eyes, we find a diagonal structure below the upper eyelid. That is the lower eye socket. Let's sculpt this structure out directly with the brush. Just like our previous analysis, there will be a face here. Let's make the rough structure of the nose. This is the position of the nostrils. Continue to create the structure for the front part of the mouth. Let's draw the shape of it. Besides its overall position, an important point to note is the corners of the mouth. We can observe and see the corners of the mouth are aligned with the outer eye corners, roughly on a vertical line, which allows us to quickly find the position of the mouth corners. Next, let's create the bridge of the nose. Which, according to the reference, is shaped like a slight arc. From the side view reference, the position of the nasal bone is a bit forward in the middle of the nose bridge, and further forward is the nasal cartilage. Here is a bone point. We then create the side contour. Identifying several main transition points from our early analysis. After completing the side view, we find the front view reference for structural analysis. Adjust the structure against the front view reference. Now, we've basically completed adjustment of the model's rough shape according to the references. Next, let's begin refining the structures. Before starting the refinement, we need to increase the mesh density. So find Remesh tool, turn down the value, and click Remesh. We'll start with the forehead. By observing, we can roughly determine the structural shape. Here at the upper eyelid, there's a structure similar to human double eyelids. However, at this stage, we should not sculpt these details because the basic form of the eyes has not yet been adjusted to the appropriate level. Sculpting these detailed structures too early would affect our observation and thought. Smooth out this structure by holding Shift, retaining only a rough contour. Let's focus on the basic forms first, get the foundational structure right, and then move on to the next step. Let's find out the front view references and sculpt the structure of the eye sockets based on what we've observed. The mouth area is still quite rough. We need to refine it further. And continue sculpting the basic structure of the nose. This is the contour of the nose. Let's sculpt out the nostrils. This stage is similar to when we sculpted the body. We won't sculpt detailed shapes or strive for precision in every area. Our goal is to shape the basic forms, creating a stable foundation for later detailing. When refining the structure around the eyes, we still need to sculpt based on the reference form. The method of observation when detailing each structure is the same as the one we explained in the reference analysis section for analyzing the head. We'll analyze more detailed structural lines and turning points from the reference image, just like now. It should feel familiar because it's essentially applying the analysis method to these structures again. Of course, before sculpting these structures, we must first ensure that the overall form and proportions of the head are basically correct. Next, we'll use the same method to sculpt all the structures of the head. And we can freely switch among these different views as needed during sculpting. Switch back to turntable mode to continue sculpting. The nose is divided into 3 surfaces: the front, the top, and the sides. We just need to find the intersection. of these three surfaces to directly sculpt the volume of the nose. Next, based on what we've observed, we'll further refine the basic form of the nose. On the side, the structure similar to the nostril wings has not yet been made. We use grab brush to directly drag this area out. We can observe and adjust the structure of the nose, mouth, and bridge of the nose from different angles. There's actually a boundary below the nose, separating the nose from the mouth and the rest of the head, where there's a groove. We try to draw out the rough shape. The groove in the middle of the mouth is also sculpted out. With these modifications, the basic form of the nose is almost complete. Let's continue with the other parts. Back to the forehead. The current model's forehead part seems a bit too square. Compared to the reference, the shape of the forehead obviously has issues. We directly draw the main structural lines on the surface. Then we fill in the middle part of the structural lines, and that's it. On the side, this is the structure of the zygomatic bone. Continuing down to the location of the masseter muscle. Wolves are wild carnivores, so their masseter muscles are more pronounced, giving them a stronger bite force. We return to the front view to continue observing whether the model's structure and contours have issues. During the stage of creating the model's overall basic form, after completing each structure, we need to return to the panoramic view and repeatedly observe the overall effect of the model to ensure the correctness of the basic form. That is, our main focus is currently on the overall effect. Local effects are not yet within our consideration. The gap in the mouth still needs to be more defined. Just like the gaps between toes, we won't continue to sculpt the details inside the mouth during the sculpting stage. We'll do that later during topology creation. Here we just need to ensure that the appearance looks correct. Adjust the contour of the mouth from the bottom view. The shape of the eyes greatly affects the facial temperament of a creature. Therefore, when portraying the facial image, the shape of the eyes is also one of our main focuses. When shaping the eyes, we need to be as accurate as possible. At this time, we need to find a few main turning points of the eye contour, a method I've mentioned before in the analysis reference section. Here we use the same method, find a few turning points on the eyes, and connect them into a line, thus accurately forming the shape of the eyes. As we gradually refine, the structure of the head has become much more complete. Next, we need to further sculpt the ear part. Currently, the structure of the ears is mostly in its initial state, with few details, just the large frame. We need to further refine and create the structure inside the ear, which is the conchus part, as well as the accessory auricle structure of the ear. The edge of the accessory auricle is a bit thin, and it's difficult to control with regular sculpting tools. We use inflate tool to modify the structure here. Inflate tool is commonly used when sculpting thin structures like ears. The inside of the ear is actually not visible and is mostly covered and obscured by fur, so in fact, we don't need to sculpt many details. To enrich the structure of the conchus, we'll sculpt some random concavities and convexities to make the interior look more realistic. When sculpting, we follow the direction of the ear. It's important to note that although the ear is covered by fur and won't reveal details, the ear part usually has a special material effect called subsurface scattering. Simply put, it's a material that simulates skin texture. When light passes through the skin, it bounces inside and then passes through the skin to form a translucent material texture. We usually refer to it as SSS. In places like the ear where it's quite thin, the effect of SSS is very obvious, and the thickness of the model affects the SSS effect. Therefore, when sculpting the ear, we should match the real structure as closely as possible. From this angle, the ear looks a bit short. It needs to be lengthened. After adjusting, the ear looks much better. Let's continue modifying the facial structure. To summarize the model-making process so far, it's actually a repeated refinement of the model. The first pass is the large frame, a framework. The second pass further refines the framework, adding more structures. The third pass refines each structure individually, and the fourth pass is the final perfection of the model, sculpting details. In essence, that's it. When sculpting, we need to pay attention to another principle, which is overall progression. This term means that all parts maintain the same level of detail at each stage. If it's the large frame stage, then all structures are large frames. You might wonder, just like when I was sculpting the body, the head wasn't touched at all, and after the body was sculpted, the head had no details. Is this wrong? Actually, it depends on the sculpting approach. Because before we sculpted this wolf model, we had already determined the production approach. The head and body would be made separately. In my view, the head is different from the limbs. The structure of the head is much more complex, with many factors to consider. Sculpting separately allows me to focus more on shaping important parts. Therefore, when sculpting the body, the head was basically not made. Only the basic shape was created. I hope everyone can understand this point. The approach before the initial production is also very important. It's been a long time, so I'll stop here for now in this lesson, and we'll continue making it in the next lesson.